if you clap, and then you clap twice as fast, that's an octave. So I had this idea to do this video on the subject of pitch and time. The pitch of a note or of notes is about time, is about how many vibrations per unit of time the string moves to produce a specific pitch. Every pitch of every note has a frequency. That frequency, by definition, is motion, the movement of the string measured against a unit of time, the second usually. Vibrations per second. Playing an ascending scale gives us an increasing rate of vibration for each successive note. Each note is higher and higher and higher in frequency, and we also say higher and higher and higher in pitch. Now, do we call those notes higher in pitch because the frequency is higher? Or do we say that a note is higher in pitch than another note based on some other sense of what that note is? The other sense might be something about it feels like it's up there. This note feels like it's up there, maybe, compared to that note. That note feels like it's down. Down, low pitch, up, high pitch. The sense of high notes being more here when you speak, you get higher in your voice up here. You are lower in your voice down here. We have this motion of sound internally, but also externally. Big, heavy things make low sounds when they hit the ground. Things that don't weigh much tend to make higher pitched sounds in general. If the pitch of a note is connected to the idea of how fast the string is moving, it is the motion that determines the pitch. And we understand the idea of physical motion on an internal level, and we relate it to our own motion and our own energy as we move. Climbing a hill is a totally different experience from going down a hill. Two different kinds of motion. Two different kinds of energy are needed. And so the motion of the strings, the pitch of the strings, relates to our experience, our physical experience of energy and motion in everyday life. And we access that through all the different aspects of music. Of course, it starts with the beat. It starts with the beat. And what is the beat? Is it the heart? Is it the progression of footsteps when you walk or run? The beat is motion, time, whether it's slow or rapid, whether it's loud or silent. The beat is always there. But the rhythm of a solitary pulse is not the whole story when it comes to understanding the beat in music. Notes, tones, pitches, these are like words, sustained utterances which begin and end, taking the beat and decorating it with tonal colors like flower petals or arrows that can pierce the heart. Each note carries its own rhythm. The pitch of every note is as much an element of time as the beat is. Specific pitch is determined by what we call a frequency. The frequency of tones is defined as the number of vibrational or sound waves per the unit of time called the second. On the guitar, the number of times a vibrating string goes back and forth each second. It may be 110 cycles, 110 hertz, or 220, or 440 hertz, or any other frequency in the audible spectrum or the range of the instrument. The units of time we use to measure rhythms do not differ from the units of time we use to measure pitch. The number of beats per minute falls on the same scale as the number of vibrations per second. The drum beat is only a different end of the time scale from the sustained tone, which we perceive as time even if we don't quite think of it that way. The numerical frequency of sound, the hertz, isn't generally connected to tempo, musical time. A note duration can be long or short and not change its pitch, so pitch is conceptualized apart from time. But consider that the nature of pitch is the nature of the rate of vibration, the speed of vibration, how fast the string is moving. A slow-moving string produces a lower pitch than a fast-moving string, so pitch is the speed of the string. Time. Now, let's slow time down so we can see it at work. We'll take two different note pitches and represent them as waves, undulating arcs. Each undulation from one extreme to the other and back to its starting position is one cycle. We'll call the lower note C and the higher note G. These two notes form an interval of a perfect fifth. One thing that makes this fifth perfect is the simplicity of the interval ratio, 3:2. Based on the relative frequencies of the two notes. A simple, clear ratio. The G has exactly 3 oscillations, 3 cycles, for 2 oscillations of C. It seems only natural that it would be pleasing to the ear. Now, if we place C above G instead of below it, we double the frequency of C. It moves up an octave. We can call this interval an inverted fifth, or a perfect fourth, which has a ratio of 4:3. 4 cycles of C for 3 cycles of G. Since the fifth is considered perfect, so is the fourth. Now let's look at them side by side. The perfect fifth on the left, the perfect fourth on the right. The G is a unison, but the C is now split into an octave. Because an octave is a simple 2-to-1 ratio, the higher C, C4, will cycle twice for every 1 cycle of C3 below it. We've been examining the relationship between C, G, and C. C3, G3, C4. An octave between the two Cs, and a fifth from C to G, and a fourth from G back to C. This is often referred to as a power chord. And what's powerful about it? Why is it a power chord? Why do we accept that name for it? Because it sounds powerful. It's neither major nor minor. It combines all of the perfect intervals. In a sense, you could say the power chord is the most perfect chord in the diatonic system. We have an octave, perfect interval. We have a fifth from C to G, a perfect interval. We have a fourth from G to C again, another perfect interval. And of course the unison, because that G is shared between two separate intervals, stacked one above the other, one below the other. Can you stack something below something else? See, we think in linear progressions from low to high, but it's a circle. It's a circle. The musical universe, the musical tonal universe in the diatonic system, and I would say probably in every musical system ultimately, is a circle. We arrive at the same note, the same tone, over and over and over again as we ascend, as we descend. And what makes it the same is its 2-to-1 ratio. So all of this is about ratios, proportions, and how proportionality between notes, between intervals, is what gives every piece of music that we play, that we hear, that we comprehend, that we imagine, has a proportional aspect to it based on the intervals between the notes. If you clap, and then you clap twice as fast, that's an octave. The frequency of an octave is a 2-to-1 ratio. So clapping at a steady pace, a steady tempo, and then doubling the speed at which you clap gives you the equivalent of a tonal octave, a musical octave. So when we say that this note and this note are the same, both E, the same, E, it's an E, that's an E, that's an E, that's an E. Anytime you play that note in all of those different octaves, it's still an E. Why? Why is this note, which is not the same pitch as this note, given the same name? What is it about those two notes that we instinctively recognize as the same? They're not the same. One is twice the frequency of the other, or 4 times the frequency of the other, or 8 times the frequency of the other. It's multiples of 2-to-1. The same note in multiple octaves. And we think of it as the same note because even though the frequency doubles, or when the frequency doubles, you retain the original frequency. And implicit in that is at a higher frequency is that the lower frequencies are embedded in that higher frequency because we respond to this, recognizing this, and then this contains the original beat. So you have the rhythmic context of the music, which follows ratio patterns that are also embedded in the pitch of the notes. Go back in time far enough to when we didn't know what the frequency of pitches were of different notes. We knew, when I say we, the human species, when did we start assigning numbers to pitches based on their frequencies? To do that, you have to have a way of accurately measuring how many times, say, a string vibrates in a second. Now, how do you measure the vibrations of a string over the course of a second when you're not even measuring seconds accurately? The second as a unit of time was not measured accurately, it was a theoretical idea, but it was not measured accurately until sometime around the 1600s. we recognize innately that vibration is part of the process, that things must vibrate to produce a sound. And we can recognize that the lower pitch sounds come from slower moving strings. You can see this is not moving as fast as that. We can feel it. If you touch it, you can feel the vibrations are different. So we know that slower, faster, higher, lower. Does slower always mean lower? Does higher always mean faster? And why? So that's the question I think that you kind of have to ask when thinking about how music evokes feelings, how it suggests motion, going from some place to another, going up a flight of stairs, maybe running up a flight of stairs, walking up a flight of stairs. Coming down a flight of stairs, or tumbling down. Those seem just perfectly logical associations for those kinds of sounds. It's just logical, right? But why? Why is it logical? How does something that people don't even fully agree actually exists? If a tree falls in a forest, we stipulate that the tree is falling in a forest. We accept the existence of the forest without being there to see the forest. We accept the existence of the tree without being there to see the tree. Nobody is questioning that. Nobody's wondering, is there a tree? Just because you say so. Well, someone is, right? Because, well, let's not get into that. But seriously, the tree falls. Does it make a sound? What is sound? That's the question. What is sound? Now, if sound is not the vibrations of the air, the energy of the falling tree sending pressure waves through the medium of air, that where it pushes against our hearing mechanism, and we sense that as sound. We are describing the action that takes place, not just what happens in the mind. So if you say sound is only in the mind, and that those vibrations, those pressure waves that are coming at you are not sound, but simply just the movement of air, and we can't call that sound until we interpret it, then we cannot call it a tree either. We cannot call it a tree because all we're doing is interpreting the reflected light off of molecules floating around with lots of micro, on the nanoscale, lots of space between them. What's the difference between an auditory hallucination and actual sound? Actual sound is induced in the mind, let's say, by the vibrations. So the vibrations are part of the sound experience. So the vibrations are sound. Otherwise, it's just semantics. Why don't we have that other riddle? If a tree is in a forest and there's no one there to see it, is it a tree? Because we accept what we can see as real and tangible. Okay, if it can be seen, then it exists. And if you can hear it, it's different, right? Because not only is it invisible, but it is temporal. It is time-based. Music does not exist as a fixed object that we can look at in exactly the same way for a period of time. Every moment in music, something different is happening. It's continually changing. Music is this invisible, time-based force of moving air molecules. How does the brain recognize a melody when it's played in one key and then in another and then in another as the same melody, as the same piece of music? Let's say we take a familiar melody if I play that melody in another key, it will still be the same melody. You will still recognize it. What is the same there? Different notes, but the interval structure remains the same. So your brain is not identifying the notes per se, but what it's doing is it's identifying the relationships between the notes. And how is it doing that? Well, it hears individual notes as individual frequencies, if you will. Now, the brain doesn't know what a frequency is in the same sense that we describe it as some certain number of vibrations per second. But it has its own way of identifying specific frequencies based on the mechanism of the inner ear and the particular neurons that are in the auditory cortex in the brain that are specialized to recognize specific frequencies. But it's doing a little bit more than just recognizing specific frequencies. It's comparing them to each other and retaining the proportional difference between them as the music goes from one key to another. So playing Happy Birthday in this key and this key and this key and that key, etc., 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 it still remains the same melody. It's the proportional difference between the notes. It's the intervals between the notes, the ratios of those frequencies to each other. That's what your brain is recognizing when you hear music. Always comparing the difference in pitch as a proportional difference, as a ratio. In the same way that you can look at a picture on a screen of a human being and know that in real life, the human being, unless you have a giant screen, the person you are looking at on the screen is actually much larger in real life. But all the proportional relationships of all the different features and characteristics of someone's face remain the same no matter how big the image is. So we can do that with what we see. We can do that with the visual world. We do it with sound as well. We recognize the proportional difference between intervals the same way we recognize the proportional difference between the eyes, nose, and mouth on someone's face and can tell that it's the same person no matter how big the photograph is, or no matter whether you see them up close or far away. And this is just a basic mechanism of survival. We need to be able to know when we're looking at the same thing at a great distance or up close. Sound works essentially the same way. We know when we're hearing the same melody, whether it's in one key or in another. The melody remains the same because the intervals are the same. So what it all comes down to is that pitch is time, relative time. Intervals are ratios of time. All of music is temporal, time-based. A clave rhythm is a ratio of time. The distances between the notes in time define that musical idea. The distances of the frequencies of these notes in this chord define the nature of that tonality based on time. When you make music, you're shaping time. The reality of music is the reality of time. Music exists everywhere. When music happens, it travels through the air and it travels through substances. It travels through walls. It travels through bodies. We feel music in ways that we can only express through music. Just something to think about. Anyway, if this video has given you something to think about and you have not already subscribed, please do. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. If you have any thoughts on the subject, please share them in the comment section. And I will be covering this subject in greater depth on my blog, photography.blogspot.com. Check that out, please. And I hope to see you soon. Thanks.